winter meeting, and we're going to talk about managing invasive plants in the winter with our expert panel. This meeting is being recorded, and we will be sending out links to the recording and other relevant content after the meeting. So stay tuned and watch your email inboxes for that information. And if you don't get it, we will be posting the meeting recording on PRISM's YouTube channel as well. So I encourage you to seek us out on YouTube and follow us. We have like 52 followers, so I'd like to have 100 by in the next few months. So please follow us on YouTube. So again, my name is Beth Mizell. I'm the program director for Blue Ridge PRISM. I'm joined today with Rowena Zimmerman, and she is our education and outreach coordinator, or communications and outreach coordinator for Blue Ridge PRISM, and she'll help host today's meeting. And I'm also joined by Jim Hurley, and he is a volunteer on PRISM's leadership team, and he will be helping to answer your questions And also we have Rod Walker, and Rod is our president and founder and also on our leadership team, and he'll also be answering some of your questions today through the Q&A. So today, Blue Ridge PRISM is pleased to host Patricia Greenberg with Fairfax County IPM, Nicola McGoff, who is the owner of Wild Ginger Field Services, and Patti Nylander, who is a senior area forester for the Virginia Department of Forestry, to our expert panel. So thanks to each of them for being here today, and to you in the audience for joining us. So a few things before we get started. I have a slide to show you. So please forgive me while I cue this up. I should have had it ready beforehand. So welcome, Happy New Year to everyone. Just want a couple of reminders for upcoming PRISM events. We're starting a new thing this year called our brown bag sessions, and we're going to kick off the first one in early February with a session called Meet Your Forester. So we're going to have foresters from the Virginia Department of Forestry who work in Blue Ridge PRISM's service area. And you'll be able to meet them and get to know them, and they can answer some of your forest management and land stewardship questions. So stay tuned for registration details. We also will be having our spring workshop sessions in late February and early March. And we're hoping to also include an invasive field session. So please, again, watch your inboxes, Facebook, and look for registration details. We'll be announcing those dates very soon for both events. And I also want to mention that some of you on the program today may be here to get your CEUs for the ISA. If you are, you know what that means. And the program is worth 1.5 CEUs. And you need to make sure to stay for the entire program and complete the exit survey at the end if you need CEUs today. Couple of Zoom tips, just so you understand how this meeting is going to go today. The chat box, you can use that to say hello to somebody, or drop in some helpful information that might be useful to the rest of the audience. I will ask you to not post your questions in the chat box and to direct your questions to the Q&A box. It's really quite a challenge for us to manage both interfaces. We can do it, but please direct your questions to the Q&A box. And we're not going to use the raise hand function today. We have a lot of content to get through, and so please don't raise your hand. And if you do, we're not going to address you at all. So sorry to be so curt about that. So again, please direct all of your questions to the Q&A. And if you have questions for our panelists, go ahead and start putting them in the Q&A now, so we can start reviewing what questions you have during Rod's presentation that will be coming up shortly. And I just wanted to remind you that we have tried to allow plenty of time for questions, but we're not going to be able to get to each one of your questions. Our speakers are going to provide their contact info, which will be posted at the break, assuming that all of them are okay with that. I didn't check with them before. So, but if you have a question that did not get addressed today, you can always contact Blue Ridge PRISM, info@blueridgeprism.org, or find us on Facebook and send us a question there. And I'll answer that, or I'll get that question to one of our panelists to get an answer for you. And then lastly, at the end of today's meeting, you'll see a brief survey. So please take a few minutes and give us some feedback on how we did and what kind of topics you would like to see in the future and how PRISM can best serve you. So remember to look for that survey, and you actually have to exit the meeting before you will see the survey. And a reminder to everyone that we're recording this meeting and it will be on the YouTube channel in the next few days. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And at this point, I am going to turn the meeting over to Rod Walker. As I mentioned, Rod is a founder and current president of Blue Ridge PRISM, and he will give us an update on the PRISM activities for the last quarter. So Rod, take it away.
Yeah, okay. Let me switch into slideshow mode here. There we go. Bingo. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our quarterly meeting here at the Blue Ridge. I hope you're all healthy and warm at the same time. Some of us are struggling with one or both of those. I'm very quickly going to go through kind of some of the current activities of the PRISM. I've got some new news to share, and then a quick fundraising update. Any questions, and then turn it back over to Beth and the panel. So here we go. In terms of activities for 2022, we have the following kinds of things going on. Quarterly meetings. Today's the first of those. We normally table at lots of other third-party events. Most of that's on hold, and hopefully some of that will open up this year. Speaking engagements. We typically do somewhere between 20 and 30 speaking engagements in the course of the year. If you have a group that would like a speaker to talk about invasive plants and strategies, let us know that we're available to do that. Workshops, Beth mentioned workshops. We give them in spring, summer, and fall, and they have a combination of classroom via Zoom, as well as field walks to see the plants in the wild, as well as techniques for dealing with them. We publish quarterly newsletters. There's lots of materials available on our website. At our events in 2021, we had over 2,000 attendees, which is almost double from the year before. And we've got over 2,800 people on our email list and rising quickly. So now if I can only change slides. There we go. In terms of other landowner activities, we have provided financing in the past. The status of those really briefly is we've got our NRCS Regional Conservation Partnership Program that provided funding for 94 landowners to treat over 2,000 acres. That's in its final year. It was extended a year to allow the existing contract holders an extra time to get their work done. But that should wrap up at the end of September. We got a DuPont settlement grant for $50,000 a year for 5 years for treating some wavy leaf grass. And we're about to do the last year of that one. Likewise, we've got a U.S. Forest Service grant through the Department of Forestry. And we've got the last year of that coming up as well. And we are always looking for other opportunities to do field projects and or provide financing to landowners. So stay tuned. We'll see if we can come up with some more. Some other statewide activities. I'll quickly go through some of these. We at our instigation, VDOT kicked off a study in January of last year. to analyze what plants are growing on roadsides. They hired Virginia Tech to sample hundreds of roadsides around the state to look at both native and non-native plants with a view to making recommendations back to VDOT, on what they should have on their planting list, which currently consists of mostly non-natives and one or two invasives. So we're trying to get that switched over to mostly native plants. Some of you may be aware that we had legislation passed a year ago asking the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation to form a working group to make recommendations back to the legislature on options for stopping the sale of invasives. There are 30 or 40 plants being sold in the trade in Virginia that are also listed by the state as invasive plants. That study is wrapping up, and we are in discussions about new legislation to go in to actually make some changes. So stay tuned on that. Another activity of the PRISM is we're constantly looking to add plants to the Virginia noxious weeds list. This is a 2 or 3 year process to get a plant added. We had 6 of them added in July of 2020. We have the next round of 12, and they're listed here, are in the process. They passed the first step with the VDACS, the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services Board, in December. It'll take another 1 or 2 years of process before they actually get added to the noxious weeds list. But that should happen for most, if not all of them. And of course, anybody's interested in participating to help us nominate more plants for the noxious weeds list. It's a lot of work. It's very painstaking, but we're making progress. A couple other things. One is we have a project going with UVA in terms of using drones to go fly over pieces of property to use hyperspectral imagery to look at the spectral signature of the plants down below, with the intention of mapping specific species across the landscape. That work has been underway for about 2 years. It's looking promising, and it'll be continuing for a while here. Another thing that's happening in Virginia, of course, is the advent of the spotted lanternfly. Recent studies have indicated that the spotted lanternfly reproduces much more aggressively in the presence of Ailanthus than if Ailanthus is not available. And so we're trying to get people interested in removing their Ailanthus before the spotted lanternfly arrives in their neighborhood. So and in addition, if anybody out there is interested in forming another PRISM, we are happy to help do that. That's clearly one of our strategic initiatives, is to help get more PRISMs formed in the state of Virginia. So in addition to that, okay, hang on a second here. I got to get focused back here. So here's some big news from our standpoint, which is late last year, we were approached by a private funding source that was interested in pursuing invasive plant remediation. We've talked to them at some length, and the result of that is they're going to help fund two major things for us. One is, in addition to the 10 counties that the PRISM currently serves, we're going to add 2 more, Loudoun and Fauquier County. And so we'll now be 12 counties instead of the 10 we were before. And secondly, we will be adding 2 full-time landowner program managers to expand the services we provide to landowners in this 12 county area. One of the 2 people will cover Loudoun and Fauquier, and the other will cover our current 10 counties. And we're in the process of working on the job description for this, and we'll be announcing that we'll be looking in the next month or 2. So stay tuned on that one. But this is really exciting. This will allow us to be in a position, for example, to have people available to go walk the property landowner, help them identify what they've got going there and what some of their options are for dealing with the invasive plant challenges that they have. Fundraising, the PRISM is 100% funded by grants and donations. And the core of that has historically come from a $20,000 matching grant from the Virginia Environmental Endowment and another one, similar one from a local family foundation. Each of those requires us to find $20,000 of donations to match. In this last November, we applied for our next round of the Virginia Environmental Endowment Grant. We should hear an answer on that in April. And if that comes back positive, we've been launch a campaign to raise the required matching funds. Last November, December, we also did our fundraising campaign to raise the match we needed for the current $20,000 grant from the Family Foundation. And this is a big thank you to all of you out there who helped us meet that match. We achieved it and then some. And that worked out really well, and we're in good shape. And as you notice, we're going to be expanding our program. So, and again, donations can always be made any time of the year, of course, through our website or by mail. And other than that, I just have some reminders, which is to take a look at our website, blueridgeprism.org, for information on our workshops and other events that we have coming up. You can make donations there. If you have any questions about plants or activities or sources of different things, you can send questions into through the blueridgeprism.org. And again, if you have a group and you'd like us to be a speaker for one of your monthly meetings or whatever, we'll be happy to do that. Then again, send your inquiry into info@blueridgeprism.org. And that wraps up what I've got. Unless there's any questions, I'm going to turn this back over to Beth.
Great, thank you, Rod. I don't think we had any questions specific to your presentation. So thank you for sharing all those updates. We at Blue Ridge PRISM are thrilled and are very excited about 2022 and are glad that you are here to help us kick off this very exciting year. And I'd like to also echo a big thank you to those who, contributed to Blue Ridge PRISM and showed us that you really value what we're doing. So that makes us feel good and inspires us to keep fighting the good fight. So thank you, everyone.
You're here.
All right. Well, thanks, Rod. So at this point in time, I just wanted to take a minute to remind the folks that are here for ISA CEUs that you need to stay for the whole program and to take the survey at the end. And there are instructions for you in that survey of what to do next, in case some of you are joining us late and did not hear that announcement. I also wanted to say we are definitely going international at PRISM because we have someone joining us from Israel. So welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And so with that, we are going to get right to the meat of our program today. And I'd like to take a minute to introduce our panelists today. So I'll start out and I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, a couple sentences about you. So Patti, we'll get started with you. Patti Nylander.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Patti Nylander. I work for the Virginia Department of Forestry. I've been with the agency for almost 21 years. I live in Stanton, Virginia, and I work as a supervisor / field forester. I supervise 4 other people within a 5-county area. And then I work with private landowners to give them advice and recommendations on what to do with their forest land. Just about every site visit, I have questions that come up or I see invasive plants. So I know it's a major management issue, not only for landowners, but even for us as forest professionals, trying to get forest management work done on the landscape. Sometimes those invasives can make that work that much more difficult. So, but happy to be here today and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Patti. Was that your phone playing the trumpeting?
It wasn't mine.
Oh.
My nerd was showing and I recognized it.
That's funny. It was not a goat. All right. Thank you, Patti. Patricia, would you like to go next?
Sure.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everybody. My name is Patricia Greenberg. I'm the Invasive Management Area Program Manager, an ecologist with Fairfax County Park Authority. I started in last January, so I've been here in this position for a year. And prior to that, I was the Natural Resource Manager at Eleanor C. Lawrence Park in Fairfax County. And before that, I was I worked for Reston Association as the environmental resource supervisor there, doing similar work, habitat restoration, invasive species management. And with the invasive management area program, we help support over 60 volunteers that are considered volunteer I'm a site leader, so invasive management area site leaders that help then guide other volunteers to do invasive species management and restoration at parks throughout the county. And another part of my job is to manage the contractors that help us to protect our high quality forest patches throughout the county, doing invasive species control through herbicide. So happy to be here. Excited to be able to support the Blue Ridge PRISM and happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Nicola?
Hi. So my name's Nicola McGoff. I own and run Wild Ginger Field Services. It's a private environmental consulting company based out of Scottsville, just south of Charlottesville. We do a lot of ecological and landscape restoration, and part of that is always invasive species management. At least, like Patti said, it kind of interrupts all the cool native plants that we want to get out there on the landscape and some of our forest health. So I'm glad to be here today and try and answer any questions I can on how we get our ecology back in good shape and be the best land stewards we can. Thank you.
Great. Hold on just a minute. So I'll ask Rowena to go ahead and pull up the slide about herbicide safety, if you can. Thank you, Rowena. So we'll get started, and throughout the discussion, we'll take your questions to the Q&A and try to weave them into this conversation. Like I said, we're not going to be able to answer everyone's questions today, but we'll just do the best that we can. So I wanted to kick off our discussion with a focus of herbicide safety and safety doing this kind of work in general. It's a topic that came up during our discussion yesterday, and we thought it was very important to pull out. So while Rowena's queuing that up for us, I'll also add that we have several supporting slides throughout the discussion to help some of you who may be new to this subject matter to help better follow the conversation. That's good. I think that's fine, Rowena. Thank you so much. So just a little review about herbicide safety. The first thing is to always read and understand the product label. And when you're doing so, you want to look for the product name and the active ingredients, pay attention to first aid, any environmental hazards, like you shouldn't use it around water, directions for use, directions for mixing, storage and disposal, and the required personal protective equipment, which there is highlighted on the slide. So at a minimum, you should always wear gloves, long sleeves, long pants, socks, sturdy shoes, boots preferably. Some people like to wear leather boots, safety glasses, and a hat when you're working with herbicides and applying herbicides. So it's pouring, mixing, and applying. And always read that herbicide label, because that label is going to tell you everything you need to know about that herbicide and how to use it and where to use it and how to mix it. Do any of the panelists have any follow-up comments about herbicide safety?
I think I want to reiterate.
Yeah, please.
I was thinking the same, Patricia. I was just going to say, don't ever skip your glasses, because I've seen people get it in their eye, and thankfully there was no problem with it, but it's really quite scary if you get a splash of something in your eye, because you don't have that many eyes, just to state the obvious. So it's really not a good scenario. So please don't skip on your safety equipment.
Definitely. I was
Yeah.
going to just reiterate the PPE and reading the label is really important. Each chemical has a different label, and you want to read those specifically, find the information that you need if you have questions about what you to do, where to do it, and how.
Yes, and I've gotten comments from people that the labels are difficult to read, and indeed they can be, because the font is so small. So a solution for that is to Google that product name or whatever your favorite search engine is online, and find the label. They're usually readily available online, and you can download it and read it in Times New Roman number 12 font that you can actually read. So that's another way to get around that concern or difficulty people might have. Okay. And I also wanted to take a moment and share with you an overview of some herbicides that we may be discussing today. So I'll let Rowena scroll. Oh yeah, somebody has a suggestion about the herbicide label that you can take a picture of it with your phone and enlarge it. So that's a good idea as well. So thanks for that suggestion. So I just wanted to give you a little overview of some of the herbicide that our panelists may be mentioning today. So we'll talk about, we're going to refer to herbicides by their active ingredient and not, or their chemical name. We're not going to refer to them as their trade names, because there are so many trade names. So an example is glyphosate. Glyphosate is the active ingredient, but there are dozens and dozens and dozens of brands of glyphosate, including Roundup, which is one that people commonly know. And I have a couple of other examples here for, aquatic label. There's a Rodeo and other generics. There's Compare and Save, 41% that you can get at your local farm store. So we're going to refer to herbicides by their chemical names. So we're all on the same page. And just to review, we have glyphosate. We may talk about imazapyr. We will talk about triclopyr, which is a selective herbicide that is selected for broadleaf herbicides. And there are two formulations. One is mixed with water and one is mixed with oil. So triclopyr ester and triclopyr amine. And then we also have, we'll talk a little bit about carrier oils for basil bark applications. And I have some main brands listed here. And we also have a slide about that. And then some surfactants, so a non-ionic surfactant, and some examples of trade names that you can find. So, and don't worry, we will send these slides out to everyone who registered for the event. So you'll be able to review this information later if you're frantically taking notes. So, okay, so let's, does anyone on the panel have any comments about herbicides or follow-up?
Yeah, just a couple other items in terms of, again, going back to that label, and following the correct application. More is not better. The amount that they're putting on the label is the appropriate amount to be used. So just because you maybe have a larger tree or a larger shrub, more product on that larger tree or larger shrub is not more effective. You're using too much. So just, more is not better. and be patient with winter applications. We're going to be talking about winter application. There actually are a lot of treatment options you can do during the winter that you can use some of these herbicides in the winter time. So be patient with that. It's going to be the spring before you are able to really see what follow-up work you may need to do or that sort of thing. So, and even in the summer or growing season when you're doing foliar treatments, be patient with those treatments. Give the product the time to do its work. Don't go out and apply more just because you don't see the leaves turning yellow right away.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point. Nicola?
Yeah, so I just want to say that when you're buying different products and even just working with glyphosate, there's different percents in different brands or different products. And so even though I try and buy the same product at the same store, so as I don't have to think about it as much. Sometimes I have to run to southern states and buy an extra bottle when I'm in the field. So just make sure, it's very repetitive to say read the label, but even just the basic, like glyphosate can come in 41% or 50% or whatever. So just take a minute to understand what you've purchased, because it will affect like that how much you're putting out there in the environment. And then something that took me a while to learn was that triclopyr ester versus amine, that they function quite differently in the environment, but also for your safety. And so one of them is much more dangerous to your eyes, back on the eyes again, than the other. And so just know what you're working with. Take time in advance of being out there in all your gear, in the snow or in the sun or any time of year, to just understand what you're using. And just the percent and the ramifications of it.
Very good. Thank you, Nicola. All
I
right.
had one comment, if I could share a
Yes.
story.
No,
I had
please.
a resident wanting to remove bamboo from her property and a neighbor's property. They're trying to get rid of it, which is wonderful to hear. And I had the question come up whether, would it make sense to apply some more glyphosate to the stumps of the bamboo after they had been cut, months before. And I said, that does not work. It will not make any difference. You're just pouring chemicals into the environment. It's the fresh cut of that bamboo or onto the leaf of the bamboo that has then resprouted that would make any impact on being able to be absorbed into the plant to then have its effect and kill it. So just wanted to share that story.
Thank you. We did have a question from Gwen about triclopyr, and Nicola, you mentioned that one was more dangerous than the other. Could you elaborate a little bit and which is more dangerous and why?
So I would have to Google it really quick, because this is one of those things that my brain somehow will not retain, even though I've been doing this for 10 years. And so I do, in fact, myself always have to look it up in advance. So the one that you mix with water, if anyone on the panel knows that straight off, is the one that is, it's more immediately dangerous to your eyes than the one that's mixed with oil.
Yeah, and that's triclopyr amine or Garlon 3A.
So you mix it with water.
That's the one you mix with water.
Okay, and then they also have the
Ester.
amine versus the ester function differently in warmer temperatures. So not in the winter treatment, but in the summer treatment, you need to be very careful which one you're using, as one of them volatilizes and becomes a gas at relatively normal summer temperatures in Virginia. So again, it's just to be aware of what you're using, even though they're both called triclopyr, they're very different products.
Yes, and it's the triclopyr ester that volatilizes more readily in the warmer temperatures. So great, thanks for answering that question. Whoops. Okay, so let's see. I just wanted to ask Patti if she could talk about a resource from Calculo. Could you talk a little bit about that, since you found that resource? Because we've had a lot of questions about specifics, more details on correctly calculating ratios for mixing.
Yeah, so I did come across a resource online yesterday, and it's called Calculo, CALKOO. So yeah, I think if we can go ahead and share that that web link. It's a nice little tool that you can basically put your inputs in to determine what solution you need to use. A lot of times when I meet with a landowner, and I'm sure Nicola and Patricia, it's the same way, we may be giving recommendations. You want to use this product at this solution, maybe at like a 5 or 10% solution, whatever it may be. This little product or this little calculator can help you figure out what that solution should be, like how much product versus, and then how much surfactant or water or oil or whatever, the carrier needs to be. So it's a nice handy little tool. It's completely free. You can change the gallons, the ounces. And you can solve for more than just the solution. So if you know the percent solution, but you need to know how many ounces that is, you can figure that out as well. So it's a handy little tool. I think it is going to be shared with some of the other resources as part of the end of this presentation. So definitely check that out. It's CALKOO was the site, and it's volume and percent solutions. So handy little tool.
All right. I'm just typing that in, and we'll make sure to get the link out either in the chat or with the follow-up information, because that sounds like a really
Calculo.
handy resource.
K is in kite.
Oh,
One word.
Calculo. Rhymes with haiku. Okay. All right, so let's move forward, and so I wanted to mention one last resource, and I think that this came up in the Q&A already, but I want to refer people to the Department of Forestry herbicide chart, and I didn't put it in the slideshow, and I wish I did, but I will show everyone, and this is available on Blue Ridge PRISM's website, and it is this chart, and it has information about what species are best controlled. It talks about the timing and the methodology, and it also has references to which herbicides to use and the percentages that you should use them for effective treatment. So please look up that fact sheet. It's on blueridgeprism.org website, and we refer to that document a lot when making recommendations to private landowners. Oh, sorry, I put the sheet away.
Beth, this is Jim.
Yeah, Jim.
Number of requests to make your screen full screen.
Yeah. Rowena, can you enlarge the screen more? Thank you. Yes, apologies to those in the audience. We were having some technical difficulties with sharing our presentation this morning, and we're using a PDF version of this, so we can't make the slideshow full screen. So we'll try to do the best we can. So thank you for your patience, and we're kind of flying a little bit by the seat of our pants with some of the electric problems and folks being available. So thanks, Jim. I appreciate you pointing that out.
Hey, Beth.
Thank you. Yeah.
I just have one thing to add, and maybe it's obvious, but I often find I'm making up the same percent of glyphosate, right? Because I'm working on the same species or suite of species. And so once I figure out what the percent is, like how many ounces in this size tank, I've taken a Sharpie and just written on the side of the tank. So then every time I have to refill it, I can remember that it's 2 ounces into my 4-gallon tank or whatever amount I needed. So I find that just to be a useful work tool while I'm in the field.
Yeah.
So in case that helps anybody else.
Yeah. Thank you. All those little hacks that we all learn as conservation professionals and doing this stuff every day. So I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, so I dropped a link for the Department of Forestry chart into the chat for everyone to see. So sorry about you not being able to see it on the screen. So I'd like to move forward and talk about what species are best controlled in the winter. And so Rowena, if you'll go ahead and pull up some of our slides with that information. Oh, the cat just came into the room. And so I'll just let each of our panelists kind of give a few of their favorite or preferred species to control during the winter. So Patti, I'll let you get started since you're on top of my screen.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think some good ones to work on this time of year. I tend to try to focus on like the woody tree type ones because you can do some of those basal bark applications to them. And vines are another good one to do this time of year. You can get to them a little more reasonably. I think those are helpful, but yeah, kind of the woody trees. You know, we look at trees and we think they're maybe not doing a whole lot in the winter, but they actually are. They're still active. They're still moving nutrients and resources within their roots in particular. And so that is why we can kind of carry out some of the basal treatments or some of those systemic operations where basically the product is going into the plant through the bark, soaking down into the roots and killing that plant from the root. And a lot of times the weather is more cooperative. You're not dealing with bugs. You don't have to worry about that volatilization that Nicola mentioned with some of these products. So it can be a really good time of the year to do it.
All right. Nicola, do you have any favorite plants to work with during the winter?
Well, besides trees, which I think it's a great time to get out there and, you know, work on trees this time of year when there's not 10 inches of snow, right? So we will put that out there. It does have to be dry. But vines are just such a bear to deal with, right? So it's fine if they're just growing up a tree. It's easy enough in the summer to find that, you know, singular tree and cut them down. But you had one picture up there of this, like the carpet of kudzu growing over everything. And, you know, kudzu is dormant and asleep right now, and that's fine. But it's a great time of year to like get out some kind of cutting machine, whatever that is, from a machete to a tractor, and make some headway into the kudzu. So then in May, for example, when it starts greening back up, it's ankle height. So then you can look down from above and begin your herbicide treatments at that point. But it gives you some way to gain ground into the forest through some of these vine curtains that, you know, come July are pretty impenetrable and really unforgiving to try and get in through. And we never want to like go out in the summer or even in the winter and, you know, be spraying herbicides up in the air over our head. It's always preferable to be down, looking down and spraying down at your feet. And spraying as little as possible. So removing some of the biomass so we can get to the new shoots.
Great.
Yeah,
Patricia?
thank you, Nicola, for saying we're spraying as little as possible. I think that is a key message here, is try to use as little herbicide as possible. And that's a key way of doing it, is by taking down the vines and bringing down the material to the ground level. And that is something that our volunteers are great at doing, and it helps us to reduce the amount of chemicals that we need to use in areas where, for instance, there's porcelain berry or Japanese honeysuckle, other vines that need to just be cleared up. And, you know, what we'd like to do is create that window at this time of year. It's so much easier to see in the woods, to find that pattern of oriental bittersweet that you can see on the bark of the bittersweet, or that twining, you know, choking vine that you can find, or even your evergreen vines are really easy to see, right? The winter creeper and the English ivy vines. Honeysuckle is also partially evergreen, where it keeps a lot of the green leaves at this time of the year, which can be sprayed on a warm day, and it is effective at that time during the winter months as well. But yeah, I think, you know, key is getting those plants down to the ground. So making that window, cut high above your head, cut low. And if you can, you know, digging it out, digging out those roots. The honeysuckle roots are pretty shallow. English ivy roots are very shallow. These vines can be dug out with trowels when the soil is nice and moist, as it is after a snow melts. Great time to dig out if you're not dealing with potential erosion issues on steep slopes, or in stream valleys where you could have high water flow and then cause and create erosion. But those are great ones to work on for sure. There's so much. I mean, even the shrub layer is great to work on at this time of the year. That bush honeysuckle bark with that light colored stripy pattern makes it really easy to find in the woods compared to some of the darker barked native shrubs. And those roots are also very shallow and so easy to dig out with a root puller or your weed wrench, or even just a shovel in the soft soil. And so it's hard for me to pick which is my favorite. I think winter is a great time of the year to be out there. You know, moving around, you really warm up pretty quickly.
Great. I think this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about mechanical and manual control. So if you would pull up that slide, and I have to let my cat out of the room. He's crying. My maintenance cat. Okay, pardon me. All right, so we have some tools. Rowena, it's the slide for manual removal. If you could scroll down a little bit more. So we had one question from Trev, and they see a lot of companies that come in with a cat and a rotary mulcher and basically just mowing everything down. What are your thoughts on this method? Who would like to take that? Patti?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. I think sometimes that can be an effective strategy. I mean, especially with things like autumn olive, I mean, they can form such dense thickets that trying to get in there and treat the individual stems, and I'm sure many of you have seen how the autumn olive, its growth habit, it tends to be a very multi-stemmed plant, you know, sometimes as many as 15 stems coming off of one single, you know, root area. And so sometimes accessing the base of those plants to treat them with an herbicide, even though that can work, it just can be very difficult. So sometimes that mechanical kind of just reducing the biomass, like Nicola and Patricia said, and then coming back and following up on some of the smaller plants, it can be an effective way to treat.
Yeah, so I think two thoughts I have on it is that if you put a forestry mulcher through, let's say, a stand of autumn olive in this example, it's great at getting that stand of autumn olive down, and they don't tend to resprout from what I've heard from foresters due to the maybe vibration damage to the roots. I don't know what it is, but you have just removed a shade canopy. So you should expect the next army of invasives to show up in that full sunlight that you've just created. And so, you know, just to be very well aware that you're removing one thing, but you haven't solved your problem yet. So just it's a great way, to get it down to the ground and then start assessing in the spring what's actually going to show up in that site. And there will be more autumn olive, right? Because there's a seed bank present. Yeah, so I guess that's it.
Yeah, and I was going to add, you know, it really just depends on your site, right? I think it's great when, like you're saying, Patti, that you just have a swath of autumn olive and there really isn't anything else growing except for perhaps some large canopy trees where you can, you know, be careful going around not to damage the tree roots, or, you know, a stand of bush honeysuckle and nothing else. And, you know, hopefully we never get buckthorn, because buckthorn sounds worse, way worse than autumn olive. Though I saw in the comments, people have said that they've seen buckthorn. I don't know where that exactly was in Virginia here, but keep that on the EdMaps app. If you have seen it, please post it on the EdMaps app. I know we'll talk about that later. But so what I was going to say is that in certain situations where you have swaths of land that are just inundated with all invasive species, or it's just so massive of a project that you can't physically do it yourself manually or by hand, like in this photo here with a tool. What's this called? This is like a blade on like a weed whacker machine. Brush cutter, thank you. You know, it would make sense to bring in a forestry bobcat and clear a whole area, sort of starting over, right, with the plans of monitoring for that new regrowth and being ready then to treat that and manage that in the future. But I think it is a really great way of getting a sort of clean slate again, to then work on your restoration project. Otherwise, I think in situations where, you know, you have some nice quality native species within the swaths of autumn olive, then you want to be a little bit more careful, and it may make sense to then have a person going in with a brush cutter or chainsaws and doing one at a time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there was one mention in the chat, you know, if you're bush hog and do nothing, it will come back with a vengeance. I think almost any invasive, it's not a one and done. It's going to take multiple treatments, and it's going over, you know, multiple years probably. So, you know, fully understanding, yes, the mechanical is effective, but it's just part one of your management strategy.
And then I have been working with some landowners that they really love machinery. And so they're just eager to get in and use their machines, which I fully appreciate. But you know, they have, let's say, 5 olive trees to deal with, and they get the tractor out and try and pull the whole tree out of the ground, which is, it works. The tree is gone out of the ground, but you've created such a disturbance in the landscape to the soil, right? If we have intact soils, we should just keep them there. They're very slow growing, precious sort of organisms in there. So, you know, there's a place for machinery, and then there's a place for just physical labor and getting in there with even a machete or anything to try and like reduce it down one tree at a time. And so it's very site specific. It's kind of sounds like a wishy-washy answer, but machinery is not always the best approach.
It definitely, it depends, you know, on the circumstance, I think is my first way of responding to most questions when it comes to certain sites, because it's true. I mean, a site may have really, you know, it might be very dry, hard soils where machinery going in there wouldn't have the impact, like you're saying, Nicola, on disturbing and turning up that soil. Or there could be a site where the soil is very, you know, humusful, and driving with a tractor through will just rut it out and really start to damage the healthy, intact soils that make it harder then to restore that site. So that is a really good point. And reducing soil compaction is really, really key if you're trying to restore a site, right? Soil compaction is one, and then the soil disturbance. And so a lot of times with our volunteers, we say, if you have something that's too large and you're having a hard time trying to dig out those roots, just cut it, you know, and then staff comes in and we do a recut and apply the herbicide to that stump to prevent more soil disturbance.
Great, thank you. That was good. I just wanted to refer the audience to the slide that we have in up right now, and we touched on kudzu, grubbing kudzu during the winter months. So the photo here is of a kudzu with a crown and the tuber, and we'll show you kind of where to cut. You can grub out multiflora rose. You can hand pull wineberry during this time of year. I wanted to talk a little bit more about some other manual control methods, because we do have a fair number of people in our audience that, you know, they're very concerned about using herbicides, and they want to try to employ manual and non-chemical control of these invasives. So can you all speak to what are some of the best plants to use non-chemical control methods on? So pulling, cutting, some of your experiences.
So,
Nicola?
Beth, I'd be happy to start that. So rather than thinking of it as a plant specific thing, I try and look at the site. So I've had a lot of people contact me because kudzu, let's say, is starting to grow in and infringe on their lawn or their mowed area, or their forest edge up against a mowed area is full of invasives and stuff they don't want. But it's like, you can increase your mowing, right? So you can use mowing as a basic tool to it does not eradicate most species, but it will manage it, get it down to the ground, and it stops it making seed and spreading and, you know, getting further out of control. So don't underestimate just plain old mowing or weed whacking at the right time of year or with a certain frequency to keep a place that you don't have to use chemicals. It usually doesn't involve a lot of, you know, brute force, and you can just regain certain areas and aspects of your property. And that's kind of with almost all species, because even little woody ones, before they get big, you can still mow them.
Any other thoughts?
I can go.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you have a good group of volunteers or good, you know, group of people who can get out there, or even just one person and spend a couple hours a day or once a month, whatever it is, you can really see a big impact. You can get a large, massive patch of English ivy out by manual removal, as long as you're getting the roots. And when working with children, for instance, or even adults, I'll do a competition of who can find the longest vine, because if you can continue to pull that vine out without it breaking on you, you know you're getting all those roots out, and it is rather effective. And I think mowing with the English ivy is even useful as well, because you can start to bring it down further, and then you've sort of cleared that land where you can see where the roots are intact, and then dig those out, you know, carefully with a trowel or a shovel or something like that to loosen that connection. But, you know, root pullers are really, really great tools. I don't know other brands right now, but the one we're using is the Polar Bear. It's from Canada. So hi, Canadians, thank you. It's a good one. But a lot of it is really effective with manual removal. There's a lot of doubt with how can I really get this under control? How am I going to control such a large swath of multiflora rows? You know, it's so miserable. But having the right tools for the job is really effective. You know, a hedge trimmer, if you can do this on your own property, our volunteers are not permitted to use machinery on parkland. However, a hedge trimmer on private property works really, really great when you have a long stem or a long stem loppers, where you don't have to get into the thorny brambles and cutting it down and then getting rid of your thorns and then digging out those roots has really effective. And I've seen groups, clear acres and acres, a little bit at a time, a chunk at a time, persistence and going back and monitoring and going back for the roots that weren't dug out and just manually taking your time to dig them out. So trying to think what else. So with, really shallow rooted plants like burning bush or bush honeysuckle, thinking shrubs, those are really great. Bradford pears, you have to be really careful because those roots, they have a longer tap root and those will break off on you and then resprout again. I saw in the comments somebody mentioned about cutting down a bunch of tree of heaven with a forestry mower. I'm a little concerned about what you might see coming up this spring with the tree of heaven just cut. Usually when tree of heaven is damaged in some way, its root system send out an incredible amount of sucker runners from those roots. And so just being aware to monitor after you've done the mechanical removal.
Yeah, and be prepared to do a foliar application of herbicide on those. Nicola?
Yeah, I think as well, manual and mechanical is quite slow, right? So you get out and you do a couple hours every day, let's say, for the next, oh my God, all the snow is just falling off the roof of my house right now. Excuse me, that was really loud. Anyway, so because it's so much slower and painstaking, I think you need to reward yourself. And maybe this is just me, and that's fine. So I encourage chocolate, but besides chocolate, you can put flags in the field, like flag around a tree, or put little pin flags in the ground to say where you started, where you ended. And then, so when you keep going back and revisiting, you can see your progress. You can write little notes on your flags. I just think it will help maintain your stamina and interest in the project if you can see that you're going along. So.
Yeah, these are great suggestions, because sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming when you're dealing with
it is overwhelming, right? It's all,
it is
just so much.
Yeah, it can. And yeah, so I like the reward yourself with chocolate. I do that every day after lunch. So I'm dealing with invasive, so I get chocolate.
And I wonder too if some of our volunteers, we might reward them, or they might feel rewarded by getting a few native species to plant in the areas that they've already cleared. And so that's sort of rewarding too, to then see that flowering species or that beautiful little red bud starting to leaf out in the spring. And then you have a goal also to protect those that you've installed. And that sort of, it could be a reward in that way too.
Yeah, that is very gratifying to know that you allowed a native plant, you saved it, or to remove English ivy from a beautiful oak tree, and you really saved that tree, and it is thanking you and the universe for having that English ivy removed. So we talked a little bit about tools, and I dropped a link for the polar bear into the chat box, and I wanted to point out, so Rowena, if you could pull up the slide with tools. And then we had a suggestion from someone in the audience I wanted to, Lawrence, they have been using a Canadian made tool called the Extractigator, EXTRACITIGATOR, to pull out smaller autumn olives with their roots. And they say it's quite effective and fast, especially if the soil is damp. So that's another tool to look for. And I can drop the name of that tool in the chat box really quick for everyone to pick up. You can check that out on your own. Okay. And we also had a number of questions and discussion about the buckthorn blaster, and that is on the slide that Rowena just pulled up. And that is available at the Go Clean Play store. And somebody was generous and they gave us the website already. So thank you, anonymous attendee. I think there were a couple of others that threw in that link. to that, and you can order the buckthorn blaster through that website, and you can also order tips and other equipment. So that's in the chat for folks to use. And just a little review, we mentioned some of the mechanical equipment, but there's some basic things that you want to have in your kit before you begin controlling invasive plants. So you need cutting tools that we've mentioned. So there's pruners and loppers and machetes and some other specialized tools. And then there's the array of sprayers, the backpack sprayers to spray bottles and daubers and drip bottles. And we mentioned the buckthorn blaster is available online, but most of these tools you can get at your local farm store. And the photo in this slide, all of those tools are available at Southern States. So they have a whole shelf of them. So I just wanted to take a moment to point out some of those things to be thinking about. Do any of the panelists have a favorite tool? Patti, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to maybe add to that, the tools, it doesn't always have to be something that's super expensive or that requires, a card, a certification card that you know how to use it. Again, with a lot of the mechanical work, it's just hand work. So, a good pruning saw, some good loppers, some good, pruning, just hand pruners are all great tools. A simple spray bottle, although I will say, just again, if you're using herbicides, make sure those things are properly labeled. And when you're measuring things, have measuring implements for your herbicides. Don't store things in a soda bottle. It seems intuitive, but you'd be surprised how often that happens and how, that can lead to a person mistaking that for a drink. So just, you don't have to have expensive tools, but still label them correctly. If you are storing certain things in them, and, keep them stored properly, not in your home, not where animals and people are about, but, store them correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just to follow up a little bit on storage and safety, if you're rinsing or cleaning equipment, don't do it in your kitchen sink or your bathroom sink. Do it outside. Try to collect that wastewater and reuse it if you can for herbicide applications. That's a great way to recycle it and prevent that rinsate from going into the environment. And you don't need expensive tools, but you just need to keep them sharp. And somebody did ask a question about the slide and what is the tool next to the machete? And so it looks like there's a file or something that's next to it. The small thing just to the left that Rowena is highlighting. And then the tool next to that, I believe it is a very specialized tool created by one of our PRISM volunteers. He is a welder and craftsman and tinkerer, and he buys these little hatchets and cuts a little pocket, and the pocket makes a really deep pocket to use for hack and squirt, which we will talk about here in a little bit. So yeah, I don't think that is a hatchet that you can buy at the store. You have to make it yourself. So thanks for that question.
Beth, I have two things I'd like to add.
Yeah, please.
I've had some people ask me, they didn't like the weeds, whatever the plant species were, growing in their gravel or near their patio. And I kind of encourage no herbicide use on hard surfaces because they just run off too easily and then they impact our waterways. So we have been using a scorched torch sometimes to just burn off vegetation in hard surfaces, and anybody can use that. It's not heavy, it's not difficult at all. And that's just very satisfying to burn off vegetation in a place where you don't want it without using herbicide. And then also I've had some people that they want us to use the spray bottles or these smaller containers. And I kind of found it to be, they were thinking about it the wrong way. They found the smaller container made it feel less harmful to them, but it's the same chemical as in a big bottle. And we have a lot more drippage and spillage trying to get the right amount in our small bottles and to use them. They're not usually as well sealed. And so I actually don't encourage necessarily smaller bottle usage for anybody on the idea that it's safer, because I don't find that mixing into smaller bottles and spraying with smaller bottles is safer. You can actually buy pre-mixed products in the store that you then never have to open the lid. It has its own spray container, wand on it. And these are called ready to use, or RTU. And I find that is probably the least interaction you will have with a chemical if you're chemical adverse or want to just be as safe as possible. So just it's easy to think that using a dauber or a spray bottle is a safer approach for the average person or for any person. But I have not found that to be true. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, there's always a risk of, something leaking or coming into contact with herbicide. And again, that's why you go back to your PPE, long sleeves, long pants, gloves, eye protection. And unfortunately, a lot of these small bottles, while they can be effective tools, they can leak because, I've even used the bottles that are designed for chemicals, and those are the worst ones. They just don't last at all. And I found the best bottles are the little inexpensive ones that are made in Michigan, that you can buy at the dollar store or at the department store. So the bottles, a lot of times back to Nicola's point, they don't hold up very well and they can leak because the herbicide is very hard on their mechanical parts. So just keep that in mind. All right. So I think we're at 12:40. This has been really great, and we've had a lot of questions. So I want to follow up with one more question about non-chemical control, because we've had several questions about controlled burning and effectiveness for invasive. So will any of you speak to that?
I can start it off a little bit. I haven't come across too many instances where prescribed burning alone is a great tool. And I guess if you think about invasive plants, what are some of the properties of invasive plants that make them invasive? They're great, oftentimes pioneer species. So they're great at populating an area that is recently disturbed. Well, a freshly burned site is recently disturbed. And so, a lot of times fire, it may not always work. Again, maybe it can be a tool that's used to reduce some of that biomass in the area. Personally, I would be pretty worried about a burn through dead stilt grass, just because that's a lot of kind of big, fluffy, flashy fuel. And so from a safety standpoint, I would be concerned about that. Same with something like kudzu. Those are ladder fuels, basically capable of moving a fire from the forest floor into the crowns of trees. And so like some of the safety concerns, and sometimes, something like autumn olive, they actually don't generate a lot of fuel on the forest floor to help carry a fire through that site. And what I mean by that is, their leaves are very almost delicate as they fall to the ground. They desiccate very quickly. And so you don't tend to have enough fuel on the forest floor to even carry a fire through a site like that. So those have been my experiences with fire and invasives.
Any other thoughts, Nicola?
Yeah, so we've done some prescribed burns in meadows or grasslands, but that's more for like native plant establishment and for the health of the meadows themselves. But I was working on one here at my house last year, and it's riddled with Japanese honeysuckle underneath all these kind of valuable native plants. So I was trying to figure out if I burn the meadow down, it does two things. One, everything else is removed, so now I can see the honeysuckle like crazy. So it makes it much easier to either pull, cut, or spray it very specifically in the winter. But I found a lot of it actually got scorched off. And so when I was researching it, the general idea is that a prescribed burn in a meadow could kind of put Japanese honeysuckle in check for 2 or 3 years. So it still has a root biomass, it is still alive, it's gonna come back, but it stops it being all over your meadow and kind of impacting the native plants. So that's the only thing I can add to prescribed burning with, one specific invasive.
Yeah, and I was gonna, say in Fairfax County or the Park Authority, we have a prescribed burn program mainly to support, native species, helping get grassland wildflower meadows established, and also to help restore forest patch or keep a forest patch healthy. And even in sites where autumn olive is well established in our meadows, it can sort of push back a little the autumn olive, but in most cases it will not kill it. And your autumn olive just keeps growing, and so many times going in and doing a cut stump treatment for those autumn olives is more effective than the burn. Or things like Himalayan blackberry, where you have a huge swath. It's the same thing, where the leaves do not create enough biomass for the fire to be able to then go through and have any impact on the root system. And so in those two cases, it's not been effective either. But there are, benefits to prescribed burns. Of course, you would need to take all the safety precautions, making sure those ladder fuels, the vines are cut so they're not going to take it up, getting permissions, from surrounding properties, or going through Department of Forestry to make sure you have the permits to burn, all those things before using something like that, because it can be effective for creating healthy lands. However, controlling your super aggressive invasives, it may not be as good of a one. However, I think with the stiltgrass, if you're taking all the safety measures, it can be really good at keeping that at bay. At least that's what I've seen.
Okay. So one of the things to consider if you're going to use prescribed fire as part of your management of your land is, if you do have invasives, you want to do a lot of pre-treatment in advance of using prescribed fire. So you would want to look for plants like Paulownia or Ailanthus, Drape Heaven, Japanese stiltgrass, any of those things that may spread like wildfire afterwards. And I mentioned stiltgrass because of the seed spreading of the seed with equipment that may be used during prescribed fire. That could be a challenge. Ailanthus, if you top kill it and then the fire top kills it, there's no one there to put herbicide on it to kill it, so it's just going to send up all kinds of fruit sprouts. So sometimes it can aggravate a problem. So it's really important to do several years of pre-treatment and fire be a part of your full management. And fire is not going to control any of these invasives. And we just had the autumn olive slide up, and Rowena, I wonder if you could scroll back to that autumn olive slide, sorry. And I just wanted to point out, like, under that autumn olive, just the ground cover that's there, and there's not a lot of fuel there to even carry a fire that would kill those things back. So
yeah, and I was going to say, I have to say, I said that it can be effective on stiltgrass, but then there was a situation where we had a forest burn, and then that next year stiltgrass was throughout the entire forest patch where we had the fire. So it can work against, what Nicola was saying, where it's this disturbed area. So it can have that impact. So yeah, I think the pre-treatment and being careful with your plans.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'd like to kind of cruise through a couple of, I just want to talk quickly about some of we talked about autumn olive and control, and we have this slide up. I'd like to talk a little bit about some techniques. So Rowena, if you could scroll to the basal bark technique slide and the control cut stump slide. I'd like for folks to be able to see those, and we can talk briefly about some of those. So we've had a lot of questions about basal bark, and we talked briefly at the beginning of our session about using triclopyr and basil or carrier oil to do basal bark treatment. What are some of the best invasive plants to use this control method on?
I'll go ahead. I mean, I like using it on Ailanthus, again, because oftentimes you're dealing with sapling to large tree sizes, so you're able to walk right up to the base of the tree. So it's a great treatment option on those.
Okay. So Nicola?
I'd use this on any woody species, really. I think it's effective on all of them. I like using a chemical mixed in oil because the oil sinks in through the wood. That's how it's designed to work. And so it actually is almost stickier to the species you're applying it to, as opposed to it running off, across the soil. That's not the intent. And then this method is very species specific because you're working on one stem at a time, right? You're not spraying the whole forest. You're walking up to a tree and spraying the whole way around one tree trunk and then moving on to the next one. I think it's also important to use a dye for yourself because you'll get turned around in the woods if you've got more than 5 trees and you won't remember which ones you've already sprayed. And so in an effort to not waste expensive chemical and put chemical out in the environment unnecessarily, use a simple dye. And there are oil-based dyes versus water-based dyes. So some of the oils you buy already have a dye included, which is perfect.
Beth, this is Jim.
Jim, go ahead.
Let me launch in a question related to both basil bark and cut stump, hack squirt, all chemical treatments of woody plants in winter. As we're going, this has to do with timing. As we're going deeper into the winter with colder temperatures and with the sap generally down in the root system, it'd be good to have panelists' views, experiences on how successful herbicide applications, whether it's basil bark, cut stump, or others, would be, as we get deeper into the winter, and when you might consider a cutoff point for effectiveness to be.
Good question. Yes, we did get a lot of questions about timing. Anybody like to take that one?
Sure, and I guess I want to say with the basil bark treatment, I think, it does depend on the situation what you're working with and who you're working with. If you're on your own, perhaps basil bark makes a lot more sense, though it does tend to use way more chemical than if you're doing a hack and squirt treatment, which is slicing into the bark around the tree, leaving bark intact between hacks, and then applying the herbicide within those. Yeah, here, thank you. Between the cracks, that uses a lot less chemical. For me, that's a preferred method. And I had a situation where we did a basil bark treatment on Ailanthus, and it seemed as if it created more runners, more sprouts coming up of Tree of Heaven throughout that area, and it didn't kill the tree. So I don't know if there was an human error there in that situation, since others have had great success with basil bark treatment on Ailanthus or what. But I have had great success with the hack and squirt treatment on Ailanthus, and so but at the same time that is more manual, and manually intensive because you have to do a proper hack. And then apply the herbicide. And on that note, I wanted to add also, when you're using tools with chemicals, keep those tools stored with your chemicals and separate, and don't use them at other times when you're not wearing chemical gloves, to keep yourself from being in contact with the herbicide. But the timing, we were going to refer to the label for the timing, because the label will tell you the temperature limits in which the chemical may be used. And then when referring to the plants during spring or winter going into spring with the plant coming to life, and whether the hack and squirt or cut stump treatments can be effective. I think that a lot of it really just depends on also the warming climate, the temperature that's happening. As we reach into spring, you may see some of the plants, start to send liquid up into the cut. And so then that it's not absorbing the plant well. And so I think the timing really is going to depend too on the location and where you're working, the weather, and how things are changing with our climate.
Mm-hmm.
And
that
publication that you referenced, Beth, that DOF put out, it says do this treatment from July. I think for some of the basil treatments, I think it says from July to all the way through February. And some of what I was reading, you could expect to do it in the fall, a great time, because that's when a lot of the sugars and starches are moving down into the roots. So you're kind of using that plant morphology to your advantage. You know, maybe December, January, the very, very cold months of winter, maybe it's not as perfect. And some anecdotal things that I read were that you can do those applications in November. Maybe it's a little bit better if you wait till February, but again, that was anecdotal. That was not research-based. But like I said, our publication basically says, you know, for some of these basal treatments, you can do them from, you know, July, September, late summer, early fall, all the way through. So I think that's another advantage to this type of treatment is it's not a very specific window. So, you know, we all have busy lives, right? I mean, I'm an Uber driver for my kids and all the things that they're involved in. So, you know, sometimes managing our forests kind of can go to the back burner, and that may even include trying to manage some of these invasive plants. So, you know, I think things like cut stump and hack and squirt and basal bark, where you have, you know, several months through the winter where you can treat, it's a little more forgiving in that you don't have this very small window that you have to get it done.
Yeah, and I would just to clarify what Patti and Patricia have been saying, for anyone who's not keeping up in the audience, the only reason we would stop in the March through June window is due to a rising sap from the roots up to the crown of the trees. And so it just makes the chemicals less effective in killing the whole root mass that's below ground. So it's not that you're like harming the environment or doing anything, you know, illegal. It's just not as effective as killing the whole tree and the roots. So you want to get the chemicals into the wood so as it translocates down underground.
Very good point. So we're at 12:55, and I was wondering if our three panelists, if you all would be willing to stay a few extra minutes to answer a few more questions, and we'll try to wrap up by 1:10, if that's agreeable to you all. Thank you so much. And folks, if you have to hop off at 1, this will be recorded. We'll send out all kinds of follow-up information and resources, so you won't miss out. But we'll go ahead and answer a few more questions. So there was another question that I wanted to ask you all about lesser celandine, and if you all have any experience managing this form. We're quickly coming upon the time where we would want to, if you have it, it's time to treat it. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about that. And I first would like to mention that Blue Ridge PRISM does have a fact sheet on this plant if you're looking for more information on this.
Yeah, it's the big one on my radar right now. We've already seen it in some stream valleys, and it's happy and green and just going to be so beautiful this spring, I'm sure. Lots of comments about how pretty it is. So with managing lesser celandine, we've been in conversations with our contractor in the past year because of the fact that there is just so much land to manage here in Fairfax County for lesser celandine, where we're trying to protect delicate species, you know, like Virginia bluebells or other spring ephemerals. And so with lesser celandine, what we're finding is in certain areas, especially where and by the way, I should back up. With lesser celandine, unless you have maybe perhaps like 1 or 2 small little patches, you know, I'm talking foot wide patches, it really does not make any sense to manually remove it, digging it out, because the bulbets are so tiny, they are minuscule, and they will easily fall away from the plant that you're digging out, that you won't be able to perhaps see it even, and then therefore spread it. The bulbets can be really shallow on the surface of the ground, but also quite deep. And so you have to be really careful if you do want to dig out, if you have, let's say, just a patch of it, just being very, very careful and tedious about ensuring that you're getting all those bulbs out with the plant itself. Otherwise, the most effective way is with herbicide treatment. And so what I was going to say is, talking with our contractor, is that with using herbicide for lesser celandine, we have found that because we have so much land to treat, we're starting early in the spring, and then you have plants later in the spring. So I'm talking late February, March, April. Our contractor prefers to spray later, starting March, and we found that even then, you have plants that haven't even sprouted from their bulbet come April, May, and then you have sort of another population of lesser celandine that's out. And so we will be starting to treat our parkland twice in the spring season in hopes of having a more effective control method, because one time in the spring hasn't been showing us it be effective. And then there's also situations in where we have more low-lying areas where perhaps the moisture is higher. We are using aquatic specified herbicide for those situations that are, herbicides that are used in water, for instance, because of the fact that perhaps the moisture level is just so high that the plant isn't absorbing the chemical into the bulbets and killing it. So the timing is just it's so short too, right? I think the language says, the text says to spray when it's flowered by 50% flowers, and that's the ideal time to spray. But when we're dealing with so much land and few people to do the management, we're kind of going on from one end to the other and trying to spend more time out there by spraying the areas twice to make sure that we're getting all of it.
Thank you, Patricia. Do you have any suggestions on what herbicides to use for the lesser celandine?
Yeah, I was going to look this one up too to be prepared for which species, which herbicides we use, our contractor uses for lesser celandine.
I know our fact sheet, and I keep saying celandine, it's celandine. Our fact sheet says aquatic label glyphosate, but we don't have any more detailed information than that.
Yeah, I think that's what is ideal.
This is Jim.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, the literature is all about 2% glyphosate.
Okay.
I have tried 2% triclopyr in a field situation, trying not to harm the grasses, and that apparently did not work. I had to go over it back again with 2% glyphosate.
All right, good to know. Thanks, Jim.
And Beth,
yes,
just something from some other talks I've seen. People are using aquatic safe glyphosate to treat forbs down in wet areas and stream banks, and that's great. The reason it's aquatic safe is that the surfactant has been removed from regular glyphosate formulation. So the surfactant is something that kind of spreads it and sticks it onto the leaf surface. So the surfactants have been found to damage a lot of aquatic life forms further down in the wetland and the stream in the food chain. So I would just caution people adding a surfactant back into an aquatic safe glyphosate before they spray it in a stream setting, to make sure that you've thought that through and got the right surfactant that is also aquatic safe. So just a little detailed pet peeve of mine. So we're trying to keep our streams and wetlands safe. So if we have to use herbicides, let's make sure we're using the right kind.
Absolutely. That's why it's important to read that label and understand the product that you are going to use. So we can't emphasize that enough. And then a final question.
I can answer this real quick. I think I might be just repeating what Nicola was saying, but I was quickly looking it up for what our contractor uses. It's Garland 3A. It's not meant for saltwater bays or estuaries. So, that's one to avoid, but it is permissible to treat in non-irrigation or ditch areas and seasonally dry wetlands. And so that is one I believe that our contractor will use to avoid native grasses. Is that what you were saying, Nicola? Sorry if I missed it.
So the Garland 3A, that's a triclopyr product, right?
Right. Sorry.
Yes. So that's the aquatic safe triclopyr. Yeah. There's also aquatic safe glyphosate. All I was saying was just be careful then not to get a bit snap happy and throw some surfactant in and totally mess up the idea of it being aquatic safe if you've already done your research. So.
All right. Okay. So I will pose one final question, and first I'd like to say to everyone, thank you so much for sending us all of your questions in advance or submitting your questions today. We really tried to answer some of the biggest, most outstanding questions out there. but we only had an hour, so we're not going to get to all of your questions. And I do apologize, and I'm so grateful for your interest. So if we do not answer your question today, did not answer a question today, send me an email at info@blueridgeprism.org, and I'll make sure that you will get some answers. I'll answer the email, or I will contact the panelists for their input on your question. We will send out all of these resources, a copy of the slideshow, the questions and answers that we talked about today, and other resources. We'll send these out to you within the next few days and post this on YouTube. And then so I have one last question for our panelists. And we had a really great question about setting goals. And I need to, this is from Rebecca. And Rebecca says, maybe the panelists can discuss setting goals. What invasive plants should be targeted first in the winter? What ratio of native to non-native plants is the goal? And what invasive plants can the ecosystem handle in the short term? So there's a lot to unpack in that question, but I wondered if you could just talk about general goal setting when you're thinking about invasive species management and caring for your land, thinking about invasive species as part of good land stewardship practices or managing them. So where can you offer some places where people can start? And I know that's probably a whole webinar in itself.
So I'm happy to try and take a stab at that.
Go ahead,
and I will appreciate Patricia and Patti backing me up on their idea. So I think, you own X amount of acres, and hopefully some parts of it are in perfect shape and you're very proud of those areas. And then there's parts that are not perfect. So I would make sure, it might be a little counterintuitive, but go in and enjoy your perfect areas and walk out from the center of them and find the place where it starts to go downhill with invasive species. And maybe that's a good starting point. So retain the areas that are already in great shape and try and keep them that way and just push out from there. So then you can, like that, just keep improving your already perfect space. Now, in saying that, I often get to sites where there's a disaster over on one side and the rest of it's pretty okay. And it is very tempting to go work on the disaster first, the invasive species disaster, but do so in bite-sized pieces. At this time of year, the priority that I would put out would be to cut all vine species. Patricia mentioned it. I would cut them at about 5 foot high and also at the ground. So that's 2 cuts. So you make a human-sized window cut through the curtain of vines, whether they're stuck on the trees or hanging off the trees. Do not pull cut vines out of the trees. We talked about this ahead of the webinar because you'll clock yourself on the head with a dead branch rather quickly. But if you cut the vines and do nothing else, making that double cut, you've given the trees a couple of years breathing room so the canopy can begin to restore itself, and you've moved your problem down to the forest floor for the next time you have the energy to go out and work on it. So I'm going to stop there.
That's perfect. Any follow-up?
Yeah, no, I thought that was great advice. And, certainly in working with landowners, and we've even had some comments that I've seen come through, well, my neighbor has this plant or invasive tree on their property and it's throwing seed. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very, very difficult and kind of mentally and even physically overwhelming to think that we can completely eliminate every invasive plant from the property that we own, even if it's a relatively small property. So I think the idea of, trying to keep those types of noxious weeds out of the areas that they haven't inhabited yet. If you've got that fallow field that provides great wildlife habitat for birds, rabbits, deer, turkey, grouse, all kinds of little critters, and you don't have a lot of invasives in that fallow field yet, monitor that site and keep them from entering that site. So certainly, looking at the areas that are good and trying to keep them that way, because trying to completely eliminate I think is going to be kind of physically and mentally overwhelming. So finding those transition zones where it goes from good to less good, and maybe focusing your effort there and starting to kind of work your way back into, where you need to treat more and more plants. you know, I tend to sometimes look at some of the worst, and this is just my personal opinion, so it may differ. I tend to say go after those ailanthus trees just because of the chemical that they put out in the soil to prevent other plants from growing near them. You know, something like a honeysuckle plant doesn't necessarily do that. Autumn olive, yes, they have a lot of seeds. Birds do eat them. So, you know, kind of maybe from like worst to less worse. I don't like ailanthus because of that chemical warfare that it puts out.
Yeah, I would just back up everything Patti and Nicola said. And, you know, stopping the seed source is sort of the message there, right? With cutting those vines and getting some of those out, stopping that seed source in those, the worst of the worst sections, but focusing your area, focusing your time on those healthier patches and keeping them out. That is one of our priorities with the Park Authority, is focusing our work on keeping those invasives out of our really healthy parcels of land. And at the same time, that may mean having to work on the adjacent horrific patch of land, because that is the seed source that is starting to invade our healthier patch of forest. And so, yeah, I would just agree on that. You know, that garlic mustard also has an allelopathic chemical that alters the soil chemistry. And that's an easy go getter. Go get that in the early spring. Find that little white flower. It's an easy one to work on, and fun to pull and even eat. But yeah, so thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, that was a wonderful way to wrap up this discussion. And I just want to direct those in the audience. I did drop a link to a wonderful resource that was actually developed. Well, they translated it into a very user-friendly resource. It's called Where Do I Start? And it's by Ellen J. Cart. And she walks through how to start managing your invasive plants and how to assess them and how to map them, and basically everything that the panelists just mentioned about starting small and work from your best areas to your worst areas. So with that, I want to take a moment to thank Nicola and Patricia and Patti for joining us this afternoon. Thank you everyone in the audience for all of your wonderful questions and your interest in this work. And if we all do a little bit, we can make a really big difference. I also want to take a moment to thank Rowena and Jim and Rod for helping to pull this webinar off. And yeah, thank you, Rowena. And again, if you all have any questions, please send us an email, info@blueridgeprism.org, and I'll pick that email up and get back to you as soon as possible. And I'd also like to mention that we are supported by the Virginia Environmental Endowment and donors like you. So if you value the content today, please maybe take a look and make a donation to Blue Ridge Prism. And then also a reminder, upon leaving the Zoom webinar, you'll have the opportunity to complete a survey, and you won't see the survey until you click the leave button. So let us know how we did. Let us know how we can best serve you. Rate us, tell us more topics you're interested in. Let us know how our panelists helped you today. So we're so excited about 2022 and hope to see you again soon. Happy New Year, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.